This morning's call to worship is by J. Abernathy, Jr. He calls us, "Love is our greatest purpose." We affirm that love is our greatest purpose. Accepting one another is the truest form of faithful living. The search for truth is our constant star. We pledge our hearts, minds, and hands to challenge injustice with courage, to find hope in times of fear, and to live out our Unitarian Universalist values every day as a beloved community. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all that is sacred in life. Let us light our chalice. I hope you will say the words with me. We kindle this chalice flame to remind ourselves of the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of love.
Welcome to the January 8th, 2023 service of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Burlington. We acknowledge that our meeting house and grounds near the edge of Lake Champlain to the Abnaki Bitobak, or the waters in between, are located on the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Western Abenaki people, who continue to live with us in community. We honor and respect the Abnaki as the traditional stewards of this land and strive to respect and protect this land while continuing to honor the legacy of Vermont's Indigenous peoples. I'm Judy Brooke, a member of the Worship Associates team. Joining me today are the Reverend Patricia Hart, Developmental Senior Minister, plus a meeting house full of friends, old and new, and those of you joining me via live streaming from our homes. It is so good to be together. If you're new to the UU and are feeling brave, would you be willing to raise your hand so we can extend to you a special welcome? Welcome. We'd like to know you, get to know you better. So please fill out the card in the pew rack and place it in the collection basket or hand it to one of our welcome ambassadors. Today's welcome ambassadors, would you please stand and wave your hand? Thank you. We also have a welcome table at our coffee hour right after today's service. Come, let us meet you. We are a liberal religious community guided by 8 principles, including acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. January's theme, Finding Our Center, and today's topic, Finding Balance, will address this principle. We are an active congregation. After this service, there's the before mentioned in-person coffee hour, a climate conversation group, and a second Sunday discussion group, or a circle. So, check out our latest newsletter or on our website, uusociety.org, to find out more. Grateful thanks to all who made this service possible. Special thanks to Director of Music, James Stewart, Director of Lifespan Faith Development, Erica Reef, Tech Team up in the balcony under the leadership of Woody Fulton, our Director of Operations and Finance, Christina Fulton, who holds us all together in so many ways, and Facilities Manager, David McFeeters. No matter who you are, where you come from, what you believe, you are welcome here. Come, Let us worship together.
So thanks to Judy Brooke, who is watching right now, but could not be here with us. So she's recorded some wonderful parts of today's service near her house, near the lake, which is always lovely to see. So I'm Tricia Hart, and I have a couple of additions to Judy's welcome and one correction. I'm not just getting the telepathy from you, Gail, but we are actually having the second Sunday Circle discussion next week because we took New Year's Day off, so that's our second Sunday. So that's happening next week. And I hope that if you haven't yet tried out one of those, I hope that you will join them. They're wonderful conversations. I also have a couple of announcements from Erica Reef, the Director of Lifespan Faith Development, who's not here right this minute, and you may have noticed that the children are not here today. They are here, but they're downstairs. This morning, parents and children are having an alternative start to Sunday worship with family chapel on the lower level in the community room. We haven't done that for a while, and Erica's excited about bringing that tradition back. So don't be surprised if a bunch of parents come in a few minutes when family chapel's over. Erica wanted you to know that for the month of January, the whole faith development program is going to be leaning into this theme of finding our center by allowing children to explore the theme in a multi-age group instead of in age-based classrooms. So this invitation to coffee hour, I want to underscore it because if you actually do have time to stay after the service and go down to coffee hour, you will get to see some of the stations and activities that the children are doing today. And not just look at them, but you actually get to participate too. So I hope that you'll want to do that. Next Sunday, the 15th, Reverend David Ruffin is going to be leading the whole faith development group in a workshop on finding our center, using our voices and techniques for being present and grounded in our bodies. So it's possible that we will actually have echoes of that experience through the floor next week, but that's next week. Also next week, next Sunday is Martin Luther King's actual birthday, and the whole weekend is a celebration of his life. And at 3 o'clock next Sunday, January 15th, right here in this space, returning after a few years' absence, is the annual Martin Luther King Day speaker. This year, the speaker is the chair of the National ACLU board. Her name is Deborah Archer. This is an important tradition, once again, coming back live, and it's an important connection with this congregation because Patrick Brown and the Multicultural Resource Center has chosen this meeting house as the space where the speaker is, which is great because a whole bunch of members of the community come here, and you can come too. You can come too. I think that is everything that I need to tell you. And James is going to tell you some more about the hymn.
Good morning. Happy New Year. Today, Reverend Tricia will be talking about history, our history, the history of this congregation. And when I came in this morning, I found this little booklet that was on the pulpit that was found. This is from the 100th anniversary of this society. This was printed in 1910. And inside is like an entire week's worth of services and songs and sermons that were shared around the centenary of this congregation. So we're going to be singing a hymn that might have been sung at that time. That's hymn number 187. It's called It Sounds Along the Ages, and within this you'll see a lot of the Unitarian ideas of the late 19th, early 20th century. You'll hear mentions of the Bible, you'll hear mentions of Sinai, of Psalms, of Buddha, and of oracles. Can we all stand and sing this hymn together? It sounds along the ages, soul answering to soul. It kindles on the pages of every Bible scroll. The psalmist heard and sang it, from bottom leaves it rolled, and prophet tongues outrang it, to sleeping nations woke. From Sinai's cliffs it echoed, it breathed from Buddha's tree. It jogged in Athens market, it hallowed Galilee. The hammer stroke of Luther, the pilgrim's seaside prayer, the oracles of Concord, one holy word declare. It calls and no new justice, it speaks and no new truth. In ever nobler stature and unexhausted youth, forever on resounding and knowing not of time, our lost but catch the music of its eternal chime. Thank you. Please be seated.
Hi, I'm Judy Brooke, the worship associate for today, and I've been thinking about the month's topic of centering and today's Sunday topic of balance, and thought I'd approach it from an artistic viewpoint. It's nothing that you haven't known since you were a kid on the playground. Remember the merry-go-round that had the places to hold on for dear life as it spun around fulcrum? That's underneath, but that's the point that this merry-go-round spins on. And you stood on this and hung on for dear life as either you already kicked yourself around spinning or someone else pushed on these handholds and sent you spinning. And you got really dizzy, really fast. It tended to throw you off, and sometimes you did just go tumbling over. That's what being uncentered is like. Now, many of us learned on the merry-go-round that if we got on that merry-go-round, and when it started to spin really fast, we quickly got into the center, sat down, and sometimes focused on something outside of this merry-go-round, maybe the bus stop sign. And as we spun around, we didn't get thrown off center. We spun right on that little dot, that fulcrum, and we didn't get dizzy, and we had a much more calm ride of it. Now, this is an analogy for life. Sometimes to find the calm in all that stuff that gets us thrown crazy, we need to find a different way of being, a different way to center ourselves. So let's go over to another part of the playground. Remember the teeter-totter? Another fulcrum. A balance point. And this time, remember getting on the teeter-totter and holding on. And I don't know which person you were. I'm the guy down on the bottom. And we held on, and we didn't get very far. If it's an unevenly balanced teeter-totter, the heavier person is always going to be down and the lighter person up. And sure, this heavier person can jump once in a while up and down, but that doesn't do much for this person, just sort of a little jiggle here and there. This is no fun. So sometimes, in order to have more fun in a relationship, on the playground or in life, you need to change where that fulcrum is. Now, the teeter-totters I grew up on, in the middle, had an iron piece like this. So you could change where that fulcrum came in. So let's change our teeter-totter and move the fulcrum over here. And we get the same two people on the teeter-totter holding on. And now, because of this inequality here, there's a great time going up and down. There's an equal balance because of a shift in that fulcrum. And that works for both on the playground and in life. This is an analogy, and it's a way of talking about something using something that's similar, but not exactly the same thing. So I love to play with watercolor. So let me create a balanced watercolor. And I'm going to choose a topic that's everybody's favorite. Let's make it sunflowers. And they've got a great center of interest and bright petals coming off. Watercolors bleed a lot, that's the fun of them. Let's get a little other color in here to pop it. And it's coming along nicely. I need a little darkerness, darker in here. And sometimes it's nice to put in an unexpected color, like maybe a little blue. And when we need the stem and some big leaves that like to make rustly sounds in the summer when you go out to your garden and sit there. And there's a very balanced picture of a sunflower. I think it's boring. So I'm going to make a sunflower picture that's not quite balanced. And let's see what happens. I've got another piece of paper here and some clean water. That was a real mess. And let's try and see what happens. I'm going to start with the petals. I'm going to come down here with some petals. And I'm tucking this flower up here in a corner. Yeah, up here in a corner. And so it's not centered. It's not a well-centered picture. And some of these petals we're going to see coming from the other side of the face of this sunflower. In fact, some of them are going to go right off the side. We're not even going to see the ends of some of these sunflowers. And they're not all the same size, and they're not all the same color. We've got a little orange tucking in here. I'm going to let those, take that off just a little bit. Oh, and then we need the back of this sunflower. I'm going to put it in here. heavy, heavy stem comes off. With a little unexpected teal in it, because it's always fun to have a surprise color show up. And the wonderful chocolate area with the seeds. Can I tuck it in here? Maybe. I would usually wait for all of this to dry before I started painting in and around it. But this is a quick and juicy picture. Just to get the idea that if we go off center, where am I going here? A little bit there maybe. And do some unexpected things, like I think I would like some blue tucked in here. And maybe even a spatter of that blue. And a little more definition up in here. Just dance that brush around. And I think we need just a few more petals. Joyful sunflower petals. Can come right down off the page. But we don't want them all the same. What does it need? A little pop of a little red, maybe? Ooh, I like that. And what we've got here is a sunflower that's off-center, unexpected colors. It's a lot more exciting, I think, than this other one that I played with that was just very centered, symmetrical, unexciting. And you can see how the watercolor is running. And this one, that's got a lot more happening in it. And if I spent some time with this, there's even a way, let's see if we can do this. There's even a way to put in some petals that you don't see, but they're negatively painted, like these right here. I could even put in maybe a couple down in here. Let's see. There's a petal in there that you don't see, but yes, it's there. You can see that it's there. And I could go on and on with that. So it's a lot different, a lot more exciting, and such is life. If you break out of the way you've always done things, very regular, very symmetrical, very controlled, and let it fly and try something different, might be interesting to see the results. It feels different, and it feels good. So, happy creating. It's been fun being with you. Let us take this opportunity to deepen together into a time of meditation this Sunday, January 8th, 2023. Let's take a deep breath together, breathing in the breath of life, breathing out the breath of peace, and come into a place of sacred listening. Concern for the citizens of Ukraine living at war with the invader Russia. Gratitude for the possibility of a fresh start here at the beginning of 2023. As we enter a brief period of silence, let us hold that which has been spoken and that which remains unspoken gently in our hearts.
I want to add one more joy to the joys that Judy mentioned, and that is that this week, a couple of days ago, our very own Gene Ashley celebrated his 100th birthday. So Gene, if you're watching, in this new year, we are remembering the ritual that we've been developing over these last several months, which is a way of allowing all of you, if you want, to mark a joy or a sorrow that you bring with you to this service today. You can just sit and listen to the music, or you can come up if you want and take a stone from the basket and place it. We'll make a sculpture together of the stones, of our joys and sorrows of this congregation. We take up an offering every week to remember that this congregation exists because people believe in it and want it to happen and want to support it. And that is a good thing. It's also a good thing to take up an offering in order to give half of it away. This is a new month, and we have a new beneficiary with which we're sharing the offering this month. This was chosen by our immigration justice team. It's the Housing Retention Service, which is one of the statewide housing advocacy programs of the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity. So that's a lot of things, but the point is that this program addresses housing instability and provides one-on-one support, including interpretation and translation with materials and workshops, because of all of the people who are challenged to find good housing in this area, the people who are newly among us, the refugees, the asylum seekers, the people who don't know how the system works, need the help of us and of the agency that is designed to help them. The goal, of course, is to fight discrimination and make communities more inclusive and more welcoming to all. So your gifts today and this month will help the Housing Retention Service do its work. Your gifts will make a difference. They always do. You're welcome if you want to give online. You can text your gift. You can write a check when you get home if you'd like to. You can wait until next week, but of course we never want you to do that. And if you are interested in another walk, you're very welcome to come up and put your gift in the basket. Before we do that, though, let us speak together the words of the offering dedication. With gratitude, we dedicate these gifts in the service of our mission to inspire spiritual growth, care for each other and our community, seek truth, and act for justice.
The Owl Who Comes by Mary Oliver. The owl who comes through the dark to sit in the black boughs of the apple tree and stare down the hook of his beak, dead silent, and his eyes like two moons in the distance, soft and shining under their heavy lashes, like the most beautiful life, is thinking of nothing as he watches and waits to see what might appear briskly out of the seamless, deep winter, out of the teeming world below. And if I wish the owl luck, and I do, what am I wishing for that other soft life climbing through the snow? What we must do, I suppose, is to hope the world keeps its balance. What we are to do, however, with our hearts waiting and watching, truly, I do not know.
I want to talk to you today about history. In particular, this congregation's history. How did it begin? Who were the major players? What were their big ideas, their motivating values and hopes? And what was going on in the world around them when it all happened? Why do I want to talk to you about all of this? Besides the fact that I find history endlessly fascinating, it's because I have learned over the last many years of serving different congregations that when we can know what motivated and anchored a congregation at its very beginning, it gives us some context in which to measure or look at least the current reality. How have those anchoring values and hopes changed? How have they stayed the same? And how does all of it connect with what's happening in the world around us now? I've worked with a few dozen different UU congregations, and I've come to know 9 of them really well. I want to give you just a few examples of what I'm talking about. One church that I knew was founded in the early 20th century, very first few years of the 20th century. It was founded and it was largely built by one man, a wealthy, influential civic leader in a conservative city that was growing and changing, but still quite conservative. It was the early years of the first couple decades of the 20th century. That small city had much of what it needed in order to succeed. There was electricity, there were street lights, there were more people, there was growing commerce, and this particular man decided that one of the things the city needed was a more open, liberal church. It was an inspiring story, and it succeeded until that influential, wealthy founder died 35 years later. That congregation knows well how to tell their origin story. And in the almost 90 years since, it's not clear that they've been able to find a new vision to tell. Another congregation, organized in a very different part of the country in the mid-20th century, in a modernizing industrial community in a rural, very conservative state. People were coming to this place to work from other parts of the country, hired in by bigger companies that were there, and they encountered a clash of values that was upsetting or confusing to them, and they wanted to have a Unitarian Universalist fellowship that would be a beacon of openness and new ideas, justice-focused. The industries that brought those workers are largely gone, but the mission of that congregation to be focused on justice and openness remains clear and motivating. Then there are suburban churches. You know, we have so many stories of cities in this country where there's a church in the middle of the city, and then the 20th century happens and populations move around and suburbs get born. And when suburbs get born, sometimes the church from the middle of the city moves into the suburb, or it spins off another congregation. And then you have a group of people, Unitarian Universalists, who are mostly white and middle class, asking themselves, well, we're not living in the city anymore, but we know what the city is like, and we know that the world is not a just place. What shall we do? That's a motivating idea. And twice I have served congregations whose beginnings was part of their town's beginning. So much so that the identity of the town and the identity of the congregation were intertwined and are almost inseparable. One was founded in 1747 in Puritan, Massachusetts, and the other, whose official founding date is 1810, is this congregation right here in Burlington. I want to tell you today some of this society's story at the very beginning. Some of you already know this, forgive me. Some of you have never heard it. Some of you heard it and forgot, so we're just going to rehearse it today. I want to name my gratitude to Els Curtis, who shared with me some couple of years ago a draft of the history that she's been working on of this congregation for several years, and the booklet that James was holding up earlier, which is this program from this most remarkable 1910 centennial, 1910 being the 100th anniversary. Part of what's in here is what's labeled a historical discourse of the pastor in 1910. His name was C.J. Staples. And this happened on the Sunday evening service. This is a long historical discourse, folks, let me tell you. And the services have been going on all day. But the Sunday night time was when he talked at some length about the highlights of the previous 100 years. And he lists some of what he understands, what he believes are the consistent values of this society, which he says is a unity of spirit that runs like a thread of gold through all this providential history. Here's the list: the steady insistence on freedom, the right of reason in religion, the love of and welcome for new truth wherever it shall appear. Does all of that sound wonderfully familiar and just exactly right? Good. We're going to go on. Might be a little bit more of a stretch for you, but maybe not. A desire for the simplicity of Jesus Christ, freed from the mist that has gathered round his image. The unity of God and man, a distrust of emotionalism, extravagance, and ceremonialism in religion. I don't know, the very first thought that came to me as I read that last phrase, a distrust of extravagance and ceremonialism in religion, is how wonderfully easy it is to wear plaid, flannel in this congregation when you come. I'm sorry, I have just remembered a story that I was told in another congregation. It doesn't matter where, but I was told about the time that, okay, so this is decades ago, but a time when a new person came to the congregation and they were very happy to have him there, but they were still wondering how it was that he didn't wear a sport coat and a tie. Different from this place. So 1810, what was happening in the world around the founders of this congregation in 1810? We need to look just a little bit farther back to Burlington's beginning. And when I say Burlington today, I need to be clear that I mean the settlement, which became the town, which became the city, settled and populated by white people, settler colonialists who came, many of them in the beginning, from Boston. I am not meaning the place where the indigenous peoples have lived for about 12,000 years and are here still. The Abenaki people who watched and wondered, we can only imagine with what levels of fear, dismay, and trepidation about what all of this stuff that was happening in 1810 might lead to. That is also a part of this, the story of this city and this congregation, but it's not the one I'm telling today. Burlington was chartered, meaning bestowed by the king through the province of the colony of New Hampshire. I don't get the mechanics there, but that happened in 1763. And the area began to be settled by non-Indigenous people in the 1770s. The first town meeting was held in 1787. And in 1791, what happened in 1791? Well, actually, it became the 14th state in the United States and was also the beginning, the chartering of the University of Vermont. So I need to tell you something. In 1791, there were 336 residents of Burlington. And yet, the legislature felt that it was time to set up a university. Blows my mind, but actually tells you a lot about what the motivating ideas and hopes and wishes were of the people who were organizing this place and this congregation, because there was a lot of overlap between those two groups. Okay, that was 1791. By 1797, the population is still very small, the town created a religious society. I need to make sure you heard that. The town created a religious society. Reverend Staples, in 1910, describes it this way: the original and only society for conducting and supporting religious worship, representing a voluntary association of the whole people of the town. This is, for somebody like me who's studied a lot of religious history, remarkably like the Massachusetts model. Massachusetts, our friendly neighbors, who had a theocracy for a long time, that we all learned in school was about freedom, but not so much. The difference is the idea of the voluntary association of the whole people of this town, but nevertheless created by government and supported by government as well. The way it worked is that people gathered in the town hall to hear read aloud sermons that were mailed in from other places. And in 1799, just a couple years later, when Burlington's population had grown to a robust 816, this congregation took an important step. That was the year that George Washington died, and there was a celebration, commemoration celebration of George Washington's life. And a man named Daniel Clark Sanders spoke at that event. Daniel Clark Sanders was the first president of the University of Vermont. He was also, at the time, a preacher in Vergennes. A delegation from Burlington liked what they heard Mr. Sanders say, so they went to Vergennes and they hired him away. Dr. Sanders was a graduate of the Harvard class of 1788. In 1792, he had moved to Vergennes and begun to preach. He was ordained in 1794 by the Vergennes Congregational Church and was given or told about an annual salary of $400, which at that time was the largest single salary in the state of Vermont. Unfortunately, so it says in the UVM biography, Dr. Sanders never received his full salary, which meant that he was available in 1799 to take a position in Burlington as a congregational preacher. In 1800, just a year later, he was formally elected the first president of the university, and he was very much involved in the work of, literally the work of creating the school. for 7 years, he was the only professor, held all the classes in his house, which he helped to build. He also cleared land for the school, he raised funds, and he helped to erect the first buildings, all while still working as the preacher, not the called minister, that's a detail that matters, but he was the preacher of Burlington's Congregational Society. It turns out that it's not that easy to read about the beginning of this society or Burlington in those days without also learning about the founding of the university. There's all this interaction. That's a different story too, but it's really significant, I think, that UVM, from the very beginning, its founders believed that they wanted to have an education that was dependent on Enlightenment ideals, where religious liberalism was very much a part of the approach. They had a policy to elect university incorporators from different, deliberately, intentionally different religious backgrounds. And the charter of that university was the first university charter in the United States to expressly state a separation from any religious body. Kind of amazing what you guys did, yeah. So Burlington's population continued to grow slowly. It was up to 1,630 in 1810. Here's the detail that matters a lot. When the congregation was chartered by the town in 1797, it was structured with 2 levels. There was the society, which was the whole congregation, and then within the society was something called the church. Els identifies that subgroup as those with, quote, more urgent concerns about personal salvation. I love it. I get it immediately when she says that. So Dr. Sanders began meeting with a small group of people who wanted to be the church as early as 1803. By 1805, they'd made a covenant. They were baptizing and celebrating communion once a month. The church existed inside the society. It was not separate from it. This was not an entirely comfortable arrangement, but Dr. Sanders made sure that everybody felt welcome enough. Elle says that he met all of this theological tension with a temperament and scholarship which soothed with eloquent information about history and philosophy. Now, you get to pretend that 1910 is happening in this building. You need to remember that there wasn't a building yet in all of these years that all of this formation was happening. And that coexistence was disrupted in 1806 because Dr. Sanders announced that he would no longer work as the congregational preacher because his responsibilities at the university had become too much. So the congregation began to search for a new minister. Members of the search committee who are hiding out today in this might listen carefully to this. In 1809, 2 candidates were proposed. One was promoted by the church members, and he had been trained in Calvinist orthodoxy, and the other had graduated from a liberal seminary in Boston. Initially, when they came to Burlington, both of them, they were staying in someone's house, in the same house, and they realized that this was a mess. So the Calvinist candidate, the Reverend Daniel Haskell, removed, we are told, to St. Albans. On January 14th, 1810, the society voted overwhelmingly to call Samuel Clark, the liberal religious guy of Brookline, Massachusetts. And the church within the society, meeting separately, voted to call Reverend Haskell. Thus divided, the leadership signed a covenant on January 29th, 1810. And the former church became the first Calvinist church, now the first Congregational church over there on South Winooski Avenue. And the society became the first Congregational Society of Burlington. This congregation gathered here today. So these events of more than 200 years ago may not seem all that momentous or even interesting. You got two ministerial candidates, you've got a divided vote, a split congregation. Your search committee is absolutely making sure that that will not happen, right? But there were different theological viewpoints, different ideas of the purpose of religious community. So it wasn't just the theology, it was the what are we here for? And those different ideas had existed side by side, but they collided, which forced a choice. Here's what Reverend C.J. Staples says. He saw the whole event as the defining moment for this society. Defining because it caught, he said, the essence of what mattered most. In his discourse, he put it this way: is a small minority in religious matters assuming, however honestly, a position of spiritual authority to permanently override the will and wishes of an intelligent and decided majority? No. I stand, and this religious body has always stood for the society against the church as an inner membership, a circle of communicants. I believe in the long run, there is a wider sanity of conscience and a truer religion where the whole body of the congregation acts together than when the house is divided upon itself. A wider sanity of conscience and a truer religion where the whole body of the congregation acts together. Our religious ancestors in this society were acting out what they understood to be essential then and what I think we believe is essential now. We don't insist that everyone agree on spiritual or theological matters. We are creedless on purpose. Why? Because many of our earliest Unitarian forebears, including Daniel Sanders and Samuel Clarke, the first minister of the society, and C.J. Staples, who was the ninth in 1910, all of them and so many others, you may not know this. They believed that arguing over esoteric theological issues never to be decided upon by mortals is useless. It's not only not essential, it's a waste of time. So that raises the question, what is worth our time and attention? If we can't get to the bottom of all the theological stuff, what are we supposed to be doing? And a little gem I had no idea about. It turns out that Reverend Clarke was called and he was ordained sometime later. And his ordination sermon was preached by William Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson's father. And it had an odd title, Reverend Staples says, but really it had one central idea in it, this ordination sermon, and that is that the best good that people can do is to look forward to the good of the world that succeeds them. This is actually a pretty radical idea, that the purpose of religious community is not to understand or dispute theology or confess our sins or pray. It is to cultivate and hold the idea of good in the world, and then to live our lives in ways that make that idea true. 1810, 1910, 2022. We need, in order to do that, we need to talk to each other, we need to decide things together, because we want that wider sanity of conscience and that truer religion where the whole body of the congregation acts together. But I think we need one more point. Judy said in her welcome to today's service that in this effort to find the center and to find our balance, we are living into and practicing our third Unitarian Universalist principle, which is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. I don't know whether our ancestors in 1810 were quite as clear about the fact that, okay, maybe it's a waste of time to debate theology, but it's an important job for us to do to actually listen to one another, including our spiritual ideas, our practices, our beliefs. And not just to listen to, but actually to accept. And encourage people to become more of what they already are. Maybe our ancestors in 1810 were super clear about that. I'm not so sure, because I think that their belief in the wisdom of the assembled voluntary association of people, the wisdom of that assembled group was something that must be accepted without question. I don't disagree with that, but I think inside that is this exploration that each of us, all of us, separately and together, has to discover the truth of life, the truth of community, and to nurture the changes that happen, because they do. Because they do. Which brings us back to this balance thing. When I was talking to Peter about this sermon, he made a point that we should probably not use the word balance, which is this noun, which is stable or appears to be. Probably better to talk about balancing and imagining that kind of uncertain spot that's never quite stable, nevertheless balanced. It's a tippy, energetic practice. And I was also thinking about the teeter-totter and the fulcrum, and I was wondering if the fact that Dr. Sanders, who was a beloved and trusted minister of this congregation, his leaving in 1806 upset the teeter-totter, I'm sure, in ways that nobody has written about. There are times in a congregation's life when things become balanced in a different way. And that takes some getting used to. It's exciting and it's confusing. Just want to say that in this next year of transition that this congregation is facing, it might be good to remember that you get, if you need to move the fulcrum just a little bit, to make room for everybody. Let's sing again.
I invite you to stand in body or spirit as we sing together hymn number 163. For the earth forever turning, for the skies for every sea, for our lives, for all we cherish, sing we our joyful Thank you. Please be seated.
Let us extinguish our chalice together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and share with the world until we are together again. I like to think, though they didn't have a chalice in those days, I like to think that our 1910 and even 1810 ancestors might have said those words too. The benediction today was written by the Reverend Carl Seeberg, a minister in the 20th century. He said this: "Through our temporary lives, the great currents of history run. Let us keep the channels open and free so not to obstruct purposes greater than our own. Let us keep our minds set upon the high goals that here bind us into one sharing fellowship of loving hearts." Amen.